Warning, the following content contains clips of unadulterated violence towards countless grunt mobile suits from various Gundam universes. Viewer discretion is advised. Mobile Suit Gundam. One of my favorite shows of all time and one that brings me back to my childhood, to simpler times. I can't remember an exact aha moment of when it finally dawned upon me, but over the years I've come to realize that Gundam isn't only about awesome mech fights. When I first watched the show as a kid, that was certainly the appeal, but I've since learned that the show is just as much about personal growth, redemption, war and its consequences, ethics, politics, friendship, and so much more. The cool fights that take place are sort of just a consequence of all these other things. In today's title though, we're setting aside all those silly touchy-feely things. Destruction is what's on the menu today, and a lot of it, as we check out Dynasty Warriors Gundam 3. Now, the Dynasty Warriors series of games has quite a long history of making fun, if not a little repetitive at times, hack-and-slash games. When I was a kid, I played the absolute ever-living shit out of Dynasty Warriors 4. I'm talking countless hours and unlocking absolutely everything there was to unlock. I have vivid memories of upgrading my guards to the point where they could do serious damage on their own and finding and unlocking weapons throughout my playthrough. Dynasty Warriors Gundam 3 seemed like it had the potential to be a new favorite of mine. The combination of one of my favorite TV series with a game that I had some incredible nostalgia for seemed like a home run. Granted, I hadn't played any later Dynasty Warrior games, but I was still excited to see how the series had progressed in the years that elapsed between their releases. Let's dive in and check it out. So to start off, let's talk a little about just what the game is. Essentially, it's an amalgamation of a bunch of your favorite Gundam series, including their pilots and mobile suits that, in a story that seems vaguely similar to a plot from Dragon Ball Superheroes, get swept up and thrown into a world together with absolutely no idea where they are or what's happening. The main story is broken up into 4 separate plot lines: those who understand, those who doubt, those who pass by, and those who fight. Each of these plots can be played through using various iconic Gundam characters such as Amuro Ray, Kou Uraki, Banagher Lynx, Char Aznable, Paptimus Sirocco, Full Frontal, Treize Khushrenada, and more. As you progress, there's a lot of interaction between characters that's shown in the form of text, without narration, as well as some more important interactions that are voiced over as the characters move further into the story and begin to uncover more and more about what's going on. The story is, I would say, just passable. I don't think it's great, but it does get the job done. Personally, the highlights of the story for me were the pre-rendered cutscenes that play at certain parts as you progress. These were absolutely beautiful and look super impressive even by today's standards, and mesh really well with the graphical style of the game. Which, I must say, visually, the game's pretty impressive, especially when you consider the fact that it released over 13 years ago. In-engine gameplay has this sort of cel-shaded look going on that, just like the cutscenes, really holds up well. Gundam and mobile suit models, both player and enemy-controlled ones, look great, as do the environments that battles take place in. Every time I play a PS3 game, I'm always super impressed with the visuals that the over 15-year-old system is able to produce. Another really cool thing that stood out to me here was scaling. I wasn't really expecting suits to be properly scaled to one another, but to my surprise, they are. So you'll notice that as you watch footage of me massacring enemies with new Gundam or other large Gundams or suits, enemies are properly scaled in size, which is a nice little detail that I was happy to see. Now, let's talk about gameplay, which is by far the focus of this game and its strongest aspect. If you've ever played a Dynasty Warriors game, you should know what to expect. You, as the player, with your pilot and mobile suit of choice, are essentially an unstoppable killing machine that, every mission, mows through hundreds upon hundreds of various grunt suits that put up little to no fight. Which, while we're on the topic of grunt suits, I was a little sad to not see the Leo featured. Like, we have the Death Army from G Gundam, and it's not like Gundam Wing's characters weren't in the game, so what gives? But I digress. Maps are broken up into interconnected fields that can be fought over and then conquered by either side. To conquer an enemy field, simply show up and start murdering folk until it belongs to you. Simple. You'll notice that certain fields are marked with icons. These represent additional functionalities associated with ownership of the fields and can grant different bonuses or effects to the controller. A couple of examples are the catapult field, which allows the player to instantly move to another field on the map, or the new type factory, which gives an overall buff to the owner's army. The home base field is certainly the most important though. Once your battle gauge drops below half, turrets that typically defend the home base from attacks will be disabled, and if the base is lost, the battle gauge for your army will instantly drop to 0 and prevent you from respawning, more than likely leading to your defeat. Which, I did find respawning to be a bit of an odd mechanic in a Dynasty Warriors game. Even its implementation just seemed, I don't know, out of place might be the way to describe it. When you die, the mission isn't over. Instead, if you have enough battle gauge left, some of the gauge gauge is consumed and you instantly respawn, right where you died. This seemed like an odd choice to me, and I'm not really sure if I'm a fan of it. Now, while the majority of the enemies you encounter on stages are grunt units en masse, they're really just cannon fodder and pose no actual threat. The only actual threat comes from named enemy units that take the form of pilots from the show's various universes. Defeating them deals a decent blow to the enemy's reinforcement gauge and allows you to complete the mission much quicker. When starting out on a map, I would almost always proceed down a route that would put me in conflict with one of these named opponents, as letting them freely roam to your fields is a recipe for disaster, since they can pretty easily handle your own basic grunt units without much difficulty. I'll mention here that you do have allies in the fight that, much like the named opponents you'll encounter, take the forms of other characters from the shows. For the most part though, I found them to not be entirely effective and definitely didn't think I could rely on them to hold their own, especially against multiple named opponents. Actually, conquering a stage requires you to defeat a boss of sorts that typically takes the shape of a named opponent who may be slightly more difficult to take down than the named enemies you were fighting during the mission beforehand. There are some exceptions to this though, with some stages featuring giant enemies as bosses, such as Admiral Dozel's Big Zom. These giant bosses offer significantly more of a challenge, but only because they're sort of like giant damage sponges that require quite a bit of time to take down. I wasn't the biggest fan of fighting these types of bosses. Upon successfully completing a mission, the player's pilot is granted experience points that can contribute to leveling up and further increasing their abilities. You're also granted mobile suit plans upon completing missions that are rewards for taking out certain named opponents. These plans can be developed in-game in order to add additional upgrade slots to your Gundam or mobile suit, allowing you to apply multiple upgrades to them, such as enhanced melee or range damage. While we're on the topic of upgrades, I'll mention here too that not only can you upgrade your mobile suit, your pilot can also gain certain skills that can be equipped. These are purchasable in-game using a currency that you earn for completing missions. Effects range from buffing your allies to enhancing combo strings or other various improvements. So now that we understand the basics of missions and their objectives, let's talk a little bit about gameplay and its feel. Depending on which Gundam or mobile suit you're using, of which there are a ton to choose from, the feel and flow of combat will vary slightly. While all units share the same basic attack strings, the attacks and effects that those combos enable vary. Special attacks, which are enabled after filling up a gauge by killing enemies, also vary from suit to suit. Some suits find themselves better suited to single target combat, while others excel at AoE or multi-target damage. This method of all the various mobile suits sharing the same attack strings allows a player to pick up any suit and effectively use it, since if you know how to do the attack strings on one, you know how to do them on all. This is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it makes the game incredibly accessible and easy to pick up, but on the other hand, it makes gameplay a bit repetitive at times. The only real variety to gameplay comes when you switch to a different suit, and depending on how you as the player feel about this, you're either going to love the simplicity of the combat system or hate it. Personally, I wasn't the biggest fan of this level of simplicity. Yeah, for the first hour or so of a gameplay session, mowing through the endless waves of enemies would keep me entertained, but after much more than that, I really wanted to switch things up. Even after I switched to a different suit though, the same thing would happen, but at a more rapid pace than before until I was finally ready to put the game down for the evening. I think it's just the lack of gameplay variety. With the exception of bosses that you fight at the end of missions, almost every other part of the game feels almost identical, and with the story not being exactly the most engaging, it created something that I struggled to play for more than a couple hours at a time. Now, there are additional mission types that can be played in addition to the game's primary story missions, such as relationship missions or history missions, and while the setting and narrative behind these missions is different, gameplay is nearly identical, further contributing to this feeling of repetitiveness. I don't want you to think that I didn't like Dynasty Warriors Gundam 3, just don't go into it expecting to play something that's incredibly deep. It's a Gundam hack and slash game through and through. If you're ever in the mood to just kill things, this is definitely a great one to pick up for a couple hours here and there. The art style is beautiful, characters from their respective universes are drawn perfectly in their own universe's style, and mowing through swaths of enemies with various special abilities has a certain satisfaction to it, even if it does get a little repetitive after some time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the game down below. As always, thanks for watching. This is Jarbo Gaming. We'll see you on the next one.